Welcome back to the Aubergine Chef. Today is a very special episode. I'm helping out with the Under the Sea prom to benefit the Red Cross happening in Prince William County, Virginia on April 26, 2013. And I'm donating 50 of these desserts, the Blueberry Martini dessert cocktail, to the event. And I'm making the recipe and the video available to the attendees and, of course, anybody who's watching this video in case they were really interested in the recipe. And I'm also on the planning committee along with my friends at Imagine, the integrated marketing firm that helped me with my logo, some of my ads, and with my website. Gale Technologies, which is a small business technology firm which helps other small businesses with their technology needs, such as like their cloud drive, and my friend Johanna at Simplicity Events by Johanna. And we got together with the local Red Cross chapter to put together the prom and help raise money for the event. Let's go ahead and get right into the recipe. And the Blueberry Martini dessert cocktail is composed of four basically main parts: the white cake, which we're going to get started with, the blueberry Gin Mousse, the Lemon Jello Gel or jelly, and Chantilly Cream on top. It's also served with the sweetest fish and some almond lace cookies. The one thing that you need to know about this video, and I'm going to repeat it kind of frequently just in case some people are skipping around or if I decide to break the video up and make basic videos out of it, is that I'm going to give you usually smaller amounts, but it's going to look like a whole lot more because I'm making 50 of these while the recipe that I'm recommending to you only makes 10. Now the only exception to this is the white velvet butter cake, which we will be making right now, because it just makes a really easy batch for a half sheet pan and it freezes really well, so I don't really recommend making it any smaller. The recipe you can download from my website, www.theauberginechef.com, does have smaller batches just in case if you want to use smaller and smaller sheet pans, but I can't guarantee their success because I always make them in this size. I have made the mousse and the jelly in the larger sizes and the smaller sizes, so I know that they work pretty well. I think the cake should work just fine, but just so you know, the 30 servings for the half sheet batch for the white velvet butter cake is probably the best batch to go with. But I'm going to make those other recipes available for you so you don't have to worry about doing the math in case you don't want to fool around with it. Now, the white velvet butter cake is actually from the Cake Bible by Rose Larry Barenbaum, and I actually like her book. She's got a good handful of recipes that are really, really reliable, and she's got a lot of other information which is very helpful in it as well. Now, this is a super quick recipe. Let's go ahead and get started with the ingredients. On the mixer, I have 10.5 ounces of all-purpose flour sifted together with 10.5 ounces of granulated sugar, 19.5 grams of baking powder, 5 grams of salt. I just kind of put a pinch in, and that's it. That's all the dry ingredients. Now, let's go with here. On this plate, I've got 6 ounces of butter warmed up to room temperature using the microwave. And here, I had 8 ounces of whole milk. Now, there's only 4 ounces because I poured the other 4 ounces into this cup. So there's 4 ounces in here, 4 ounces in here. 8 ounces total of whole milk in this recipe. There's also 4 3/4 ounces of large egg whites, or just egg whites in general. I don't know why I have large on there. But you can actually use the carton egg whites for the one time in this recipe. So like if you're making royal icing and you have the carton egg whites left over, you can use them for this recipe pretty easily. Or you can use fresh or shell egg whites. It's just fine. Along with 9 grams of vanilla. And I whisked that all together with the 4 ounces from the total whole milk into here. Now, I did warm up my whole milk in the microwave for about 50 seconds on like high to bring it up to a little bit above room temperature. So that way, when I added the milk to the egg whites, it would warm up the egg whites. Everything kind of gets mixed together a lot better if it's at room temperature or a little bit warm. Sometimes if it's cold, like if you put cold milk, the butter will seize up and get kind of chunky. Not a super big deal, but it does make a nicer product and the ingredients do get mixed in a little bit better. On the mixer, I already combined all my dry ingredients and I went ahead and mixed it with the paddle to make sure they were even more mixed together for like a minute or two while I was getting everything else weighed out. Now we're going to go ahead and add in the butter and the 4 ounces of whole milk. Alright, just like I said, go ahead and just add in all the butter and the 4 ounces of whole milk right into the mixer. Go ahead and mix it on low speed until the ingredients are moistened. Then increase the speed to about medium and let it mix for about 1.5 minutes. Alright, so after you've mixed it for about 1.5 minutes on low speed, scrape to the side of your bowl, and then on low speed, go ahead and slowly add in your milk, 4 ounces of milk, your 4 3/4 ounces of egg whites, and your 9 grams of vanilla extract. Just a little bit at a time, allowing the mixture to kind of get mixed in. Alright, after you've added all of your egg white mixture, go ahead and give your, scrape it on your side of your bowl, and then give your mixture a good blast on medium-high speed to make sure everything is nice and mixed in together. Alright, so just give it a blast for like 30 seconds or so. And take your batter and pour it into your prepared, this is a half sheet pan, measures 13 by 18 inches. I have it lined with a piece of parchment paper, and then I sprayed the parchment paper in the sides of the pan with a little bit of pan release. And we're doing it in a half sheet pan so that way we can cut out the shapes that we need to line the glasses. You can do this in a 9-inch cake pan if you wanted to, or I believe 2 9-inch cake pans should be enough batter for that. Spread your batter out until it reaches the edges and to the corners all the way, and that it's an even layer. You don't want to have thin spots and thick spots, because the thin spots are going to get cooked faster and it's not going to be an even bake. Some parts might even burn before the other parts are even starting to cook. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and bake this cake at about 300 to 350 degrees Fahrenheit for about 15 minutes. Or until a cake tester inserted into the center of the cake, sometimes I pick like 4 or 5 locations, comes out clean. And so when you stick in like a knife or a toothpick, you should be able to pull it out, and there should be maybe a tiny bit of crumbs or no crumbs at all. And then you want to pull it out. Remember that because this cake's a little bit thinner, it's a little bit more susceptible to carry over cooking. So if you can underbake it just slightly, it's okay, because the heat left over from the sheet pan will continue to cook the cake. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and make the desserts for the 50 servings that I need for the Red Cross prom that's coming up. So it's going to look like I'm going to have a lot of ingredients and a lot of product, but that's okay because I'm making a larger batch than I'm telling you. So I'm actually going to give you smaller measurements to make about 10 of these as opposed to 50 of these. So even though it looks like a lot, I'm still giving you the right amounts. And of course, you can go to my website and download the recipe as well from www.theauberginechef.com. Alright, so when you're ready to make your blueberry gin mousse, you should have all your cake to bake, or you can do your cake after straining it out and reducing it, and I'll tell you what's going on. Alright, and then what you're going to need is you're going to need 1 pound, 4 ounces of blueberries, and you're going to puree that to make pulp. But then you're going to strain it, and you're going to get a little bit less out because you're straining a lot of that seeds, a lot of the fiber, and a lot of the skin out. Now you're still retaining some of it, which is great because it kind of makes the juice a little bit thicker than if you were just using straight blueberry juice, which you're welcome to use, of course. But what you're going to end up having is you're going to start off with 1 pound, 4 ounces, but you're going to end up with 12 ounces of blueberry or strained puree. So if you're going to use juice, you're just going to use 12 ounces. You're not going to use the 1 pound, 4 ounces. I made it a little bit easier on you that way, so that way you know how many blueberries to purchase if you are going to have to go that route. And all you need to do is just go through a smashing motion and kind of just press out that juice. And the finer sieve you use, the more stuff you're going to keep from getting into your juice or your puree. Not everything is going to stay out of it, of course, but you're going to get a lot of it out. So like I'm using a fine one, a very fine one, so I'm getting a lot of that seeds and puree, or seeds and fiber from that juice. And so I've already kind of started straining this already, so it's very, very thin. I didn't want you guys to have to sit through it, but you can see how thin it is already. Alright, so it's a little bit easier to see on the stove that there's a little bit more stuff in it than just pure juice, which is, I think, helps with the texture of the mousse. Again, you could use straight juice if you wanted to, or you can use a blend like 50-50 puree and 50-50 juice. And now I've already got all my juice on here, but I'm going to go ahead and add the rest of that I squeezed out. And what I'm doing is I'm reducing it. And what happens when you reduce it is you're basically cooking out a lot of that water, and you're kind of concentrating the flavor in the puree. Now, a lot of people use this for soups and other sauces, but in this case, we're using it for the blueberry puree because it's got a very delicate flavor. And we want to make sure to have a nice, strong flavor in the mousse without having to resort to using artificial flavoring. So that's why we're reducing it. And reducing this is very, very easy because there's so much water in it. And if you want to be very, very consistent, all you have to do is cook it to between 215 to 230 degrees Fahrenheit. And that'll give you the same thickness or the same concentration of blueberry puree every single time. Otherwise, you can just reduce it until it's thick. I do recommend using a thermometer, of course, because it's much more consistent. And then after you've reached 220, 230 degrees, take it off the heat and allow it to cool down completely, at least to room temperature. You don't need to chill it because we're going to add a little bit of gelatin, and sometimes it works a little bit better for the room temperature. But you definitely don't want it to still be hot because we're going to be folding in heavy cream. So I'm going to go ahead and let this sit and continue reducing. And when you reduce, you don't want to use a very high heat. You can start off on a very high heat to get to where you want it to be, but then kind of turn it down to simmer, so that way you're not bubbling blueberry puree everywhere, because it's going to be huge disaster to clean up. Now again, because your puree needs to cool down after being reduced, you can do some other stuff before it. So like if you're making this in one day, you could get your puree and then cool it off while you're making the cake, because the cake takes less time to cool off than the puree, at least in my experience. Since I've already baked off my cake and frozen it because I made it so far in advance, what you can do is also prep your cups with the cake, especially if you're doing a large batch like I am. Now all you need to do is take your white cake, take a cutter that's about the same size as the bottom, could be a little bit bigger, because you can always squeeze the cake in. Cut off a little piece, and just drop it in. A little bit nicer than that though. Alright, and then what we're going to do is I've already made a Vermouth simple syrup, and it's very, very easy to do. You can follow the simple syrup video, but really all you need to do is combine 1 2/3 ounces of granulated sugar, 7/8 ounce of water, a very, very small pinch of cream of tartar, and about 2/3 ounce of dry vermouth. And I'll show you which one I'm using. And this is the one that I'm using, the Martini brand one. The one that's just very clearly dry vermouth. And it's the white vermouth, not the red vermouth. And again, just bring it to a boil. Very, very easy. Now that super, super small batch is very difficult to do in a small pot. It's just because I was scaling it down from 50. But you can make it work if you use a small pot. And just pour it into a squeeze bottle. And so you don't even need a full squeeze bottle when you're doing the very large batch. Again, make sure your syrup's cool down all the way, just like your puree should be at room temperature. Okay, and just for the sake of being consistent, I'm going to go ahead and weigh out how much syrup I put in there, and I'm going to have about 1/4 ounce. You can just eyeball it though. And what's going to happen is that syrup is going to soak into the cake while your puree is cooling off. So let's wait for our puree to finish cooling off, and we'll make the mousse to go on top. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and finish up our blueberry gin mousse. Now here I have my reduced blueberry puree, but I also added in let's see, 1/3 ounce of lemon juice, 1/3 ounce of vanilla extract, and 2 ounces of gin. And whisk that all together. So gin is the alcohol component, and it's not being cooked out, so the alcohol is staying in there. And again, I'm making a large batch, that's why it's such a big bowl and so much puree. So it made it a little bit more watery again. So it's okay because it's about the same consistency that it was prior to adding in, or prior to reducing it. So we've got the same amount of blueberries, but now we have all the extra tasty flavors. The lemon juice helps boost the blueberry flavor, the vanilla helps round it out, and the gin, of course, brings that dessert cocktail component to the party. Now, to do the gelatin, you combine, let's see, 1/4 ounce of gelatin with 1 1/4 ounces of water and put that on your stove. Allow it to bloom for 3 minutes. So just let it sit and allow the gelatin to soak up the water, soak up the water. And just warm it up over a low heat until it's melted and there's no more granules. You might even need to strain it if you're concerned. And just add that right in. Now your puree shouldn't be super, super cold, because if you add gelatin to very cold puree, it's going to start seizing up right away. It starts setting up really, really quickly and you get chunks in it. So if your puree is at room temperature, that's probably best to prevent that from happening. And just keep it moving. Now, I wanted to show you adding each ingredient at a time, but because I was making such a large batch and whipping up so much heavy cream, the gelatin was getting set up on the stove because it was just, it was basically reducing. So I didn't want to wait any longer, so I went ahead and poured everything in. So if that's a little bit confusing, just let me know and I'll try to elaborate in the comments. So now you want to take, 1 pound of heavy cream with 6 ounces of powdered sugar and whip that up to about soft peaks. You don't need super, super stiff peaks, and actually softer peaks work a little bit better in this case. And you just want to fold it in. And folding it in is kind of a loose term in this case because it's so liquidy. So what we're really going to do is just stir it in until we get a consistency that where we can start folding it in. It's kind of like the pumpkin mousse pie, where it's just so watery that we just end up just stirring it in to add some body. You just want to stir it in like 1/3 at a time, or in this case 1/4 at a time because I got so much heavy cream. You want to make sure to scrape your whisk or a rubber spatula along the bottom to make sure there's no puree that's not being folded in. Now if you want, you can add blue food coloring to make it very, very blue, if that's what you're going for. We can go ahead and start filling it. It's super, super easy. Now if you're doing a smaller batch, it might be easier to do with the piping bag, but it's going to get super messy if I try to do that. If your mousse is fluid enough, you might be able to use a saucing funnel if you have it. It'd be kind of silly to get a saucing funnel if you don't need it. Or if you're just going to use it for just this one thing. But again, your mousse would have to be pretty soft. If your mousse was a little bit stiffer because you used a stiffer whipped cream, then you would have issues using that. And I'm just going to go ahead and add in about 3 ounces of mousse to each cup. And it doesn't seem like a lot, but because there's so much air whipped into it, it's actually going to be the majority of the cup. It's going to be this blueberry gin mousse. And the reason you want it a little bit softer is it kind of fills in the spaces a little bit nicer and creates a nicer looking fill than if you were having stiffer peaks. But stiffer peaks would pipe a little bit better if you were going for that look. Alright, and so I'm just going to finish up filling up these 50, 60 some cups, and I'm going to freeze them. This mousse, along with the raspberry mousse and the raspberry mousse cake episode, they both freeze pretty well. This one loses its flavor a little less. The flavor deteriorates a little bit because, again, blueberry is a very delicate flavor, but the raspberry holds up really, really well. Alright, so now that our mousse has gotten a chance to freeze for at least 4 hours, overnight is best, we can go ahead and work on the Lemon Jello Gel. Now, the mousse has gelatin in it, but because of the timing that I had going on, I didn't really have a chance to show you how to properly use gelatin. So fortunately, I had forgotten that we had a lemon jello jelly or gel. So I'm going to show you how to use gelatin step by step here. And then I'm going to make a basic video so I can reference it in future videos. Okay, and again, it's important to remember that I'm making a really large batch. I'm making 50 pieces, and you're only going to be making 10. So what you're going to be using is a lot smaller. The amounts that I'm giving you is correct for the smaller batch, but this one's going to make it just looks larger for you on your end because I'm making such a large batch. So you want to combine 9 ounces of water in a pot along with 4.5 ounces of granulated sugar. You just want to whisk that together, making sure there's no pieces that are clumped up on the bottom. And then you want to take your granulated gelatin. Now I'm using like a nutritional supplement kind of gelatin because it's a little bit finer than like Knox gelatin, so it works a little bit easier. And all you want to do is just go ahead and add in 3/8 of an ounce of the granulated gelatin into the water in the pot while steadily whisking so that no clumps form. And if you get any clumps, it's not the end of the world. It'll just take a little bit longer to melt when we bring it to the stove. But for now, what we're going to do is we're going to allow it to bloom. And what bloom means is we're allowing the gelatin to hydrate, absorb that water, and be ready to be used in the way that you can use it. Now, sometimes you can add gelatin straight into a product and use it that way. But I prefer to do it this way because 100% of the time it'll work well and it'll work right and it'll get distributed much more evenly because we're going to melt it down. Alright, meanwhile you want to combine another 9 ounces of water with 4.5 ounces of lemon jello liqueur or any kind of liqueur that you want to use. You can replace it very easily. You may need to adjust the sugar depending on the alcohol that you use. And you're just going to put that in a large bowl or a pitcher or whatever. It's best if the water is a little bit on the cool side, not necessarily room temperature, so that way the gelatin gets cooler faster. So that way when you pour it on top of your frozen mousse, it doesn't warm up your mousse right away and pick up all those pieces of mousse. Now, if you're using a little less liquid, you're going to notice that the mixture is going to sponge or thicken to the point where it's almost like a solid rubbery substance. That's okay. That's called sponging. But because this one has so much liquid in it, it's not going to get to that point. So we can go ahead and start warming it up. Now, you still want to wait about 2 to 3 minutes before you do this. You want to warm it up over a low heat. You don't have to really steadily stir it. Just make sure that there's no sugar stuck to the bottom. We added the sugar earlier on in this recipe so that way it can all get dissolved and added into the liquid. And what we're doing, especially if you have it sponged, if your gelatin mixture is sponged, is we're just melting down the gelatin to a usable state so it's evenly distributed throughout the liquid. Now, you don't want to allow it to boil because that'll break down the proteins that make up the gelatin and it won't gel up. You also want to be careful about using tropical fruits like kiwi or mango because they contain an enzyme that breaks down gelatin. So you want to boil that puree first before using it in a gelled dessert like a mousse or a jelly. Okay, so once the mixture warms up and all the gelatin and sugar has dissolved, and if it's you have a lot of liquid in your pot and you can't really see all the way to the bottom, just tilt your pot around and look if there's any granules along the bottom. Use a rubber spatula to push the bubbles out of the way, that kind of stuff. But everything is good to go. The mixture is warmed up. Everything's nice and dissolved, so we can go ahead and add it to the remaining water and the limoncello. Okay, just go ahead and give that a good stir. Don't want to whisk too many bubbles into it, but just want to make sure everything's nice and mixed well. And remember that gelatin is not vegetarian, it's not vegan, it's not kosher, and it's not halal. It is a pork product. unless you're using a special gelatin like a fish gelatin or agar-agar. Alright, and before you pour the jelly part or the gel part, make sure to scrape off any excess mousse you have on the sides so you have a nice clean presentation. Since it's frozen, it should come off pretty easily with the paper towel. Alright, and then all you want to do is pour in 2.5 ounces of the jelly mixture. And you just want to put it in the refrigerator for about 2.5 hours to let it set up. Alright, it's been a couple hours, so you can see the jelly layer has set up pretty quickly thanks to the frozen mousse. So we're going to go ahead and top it off with some Chantilly cream. Now I have some super soft Chantilly cream which I made. Now this is a very small batch. It's 8 ounces of heavy cream, 1.5 ounces of sifted powdered sugar, and just a splash of vanilla extract. You're going to need to double that, so you're going to need 1 pound of heavy cream, 3 ounces of powdered sugar, and again a splash of vanilla extract for your 10 dessert batch. I'm going to obviously need much, much more. And all you really need to do is just to take 1.5 ounces of the Chantilly cream and just smooth it on top with a spoon. You want to do this pretty last minute, right before you're going to serve it. Try to smooth it out. And then what I like to do is kind of make it look like there's a wave coming up. And then I'll take a little Swedish fish, one of those little candies, and I will put it on top of that wave. And then to finish it off, I have some almond lace cookies. Now I have a pretty decent video, actually I have a pretty good video, basic video on how to make those. I'm just going to take a triangle, just kind of just stick it right into the dessert, standing up to give it some height. And of course you can arrange it however you'd like, but this is just how I'm going to do it. And then that would be the finished dessert. Now you want to do the almond lace cookie, again, very, very last minute because they do get super, super soft in the whipped cream. So you don't want to stick them in last minute or have your guests stick it in themselves. Alright, that's how you make the blueberry martini dessert cocktail. Now there's a lot of substitutions you can do. You can use my raspberry mousse recipe from the raspberry cake episode and substitute that for the blueberry mousse. Or you can use different alcohols, different liqueurs, make it your own, kind of come up with your own dessert cocktail using this as a template if you want. And if you came out to attend the Under the Sea prom to benefit the Red Cross, thank you so much for coming out and supporting us and all of our hard work, as well as supporting a very great charity that helps out a lot of people even in our local area as well as on an international scale. Thank you so much for coming on out on behalf of me and the entire planning committee as well as of the Red Cross. And hope you learned a lot today. Thank you for watching. And remember, the Aubergine Chef, demystifying dessert, one recipe at a time.